Hello, and welcome to the PowerScore LSAT podcast. I'm Dave Kaloran in Napa Valley.
And this is Jon Denning in Los Angeles.
And this is episode 62, Jon, which has the fateful title of Lost LSATs? Say it ain't so, LSAC.
Say it ain't so. Tell me it ain't true. It is, as we will discuss. Before we do, let's get some of the formalities out of the way. And this is the boring part, actually, this time. Usually this is the fun part, but today I know it's not. What are you drinking?
Coffee.
Yeah, me too.
Because it's the morning. It's Monday morning and we're recording this. So it's not the usual evening time recording. And coffee for me and coffee for you, correct?
Yeah, that is true. And just a regular coffee, nothing adult about it. I do want to make sure that people listening to this don't get the wrong impression. You and I are both totally comfortable drinking in the morning. However,
I concur with that statement.
However, today, Monday morning, not the case. Sober heads prevail here, partly because of what this discussion's about, which is a sobering one in itself.
Scary one.
Yeah. You picked a song for this week. Do you want to tell me about it?
I do want to tell you about it because the story of the lost LSATs is one that concerns me and suggests that there might be a ghost in the machine. And so some people might think, did Dave choose the police? No, I did not. I chose a song called The Ghost in You by a band that I truly love and have seen several times, and that is the Psychedelic Furs. 80s classics. If you are not familiar with the Furs, definitely check out the album that this is off of. This is a classic album from that era with a ton of fantastic songs.
Yeah, I feel like you're speaking directly to me when you say that, because I am not terribly familiar. I've heard of the band, but I don't think I could pick a single song out of their catalog.
You probably could. If you go back into the 80s and you look at some of the classic films like Pretty in Pink, they did the soundtrack, or at least the lead song for that, Pretty in Pink. And so you probably would recognize more of the music than you realize, because I hear it on TV every once in a while. So Richard Butler's the lead singer. He's a super cool dude. He's got a great voice. I'm a fan.
I'll have to check him out. My John Hughes knowledge isn't terribly great either. So some of those 80s films, the old Molly Ringwald days, I will admit some ignorance. But yeah, fair enough. We can all learn some new music today if you're listening to this.
I'm not a huge Molly Ringwald fan, but I will say this. Essentially, my understanding is she got sick of Hollywood and just moved to Paris. And that sounds like a pretty cool move, no matter who you are. So hats off to Molly Ringwald for that.
Respect to Ms. Ringwald. Good for her.
Mm-hmm.
There is another alcohol update. Do you want to make a little mea culpa here? I know you were informed.
I guess last time you were drinking a Corona beer, I think it must have been me that said their sales are depressed.
You did, that I was propping the industry up single-handedly.
Yes, one of our listeners quickly wrote in and said, you're wrong. And indeed, I am wrong. Apparently, Corona sales are not down. They are way up.
Yeah.
So,
and I helped.
Good for Corona.
Yeah, good for Corona.
The only Corona I like.
Yeah, that's right. Keep them coming. Today's an interesting discussion as we maybe move into the heart of the matter, because it is entirely focused on developments and updates in the LSAT world. So not the sort of thing that I think you or I necessarily love to talk about. I don't revel in this the way I do the last episode's topic, which was mentality, or talking about logic games and how to speed up, which we did a 2-part episode on.
Yeah.
This feels a little more just like news reporting.
Well, it's been such a crazy, really 2-year period now. It seems like, I think if we would have planned this out originally, we've been like, all right, we're going to talk about parallel questions and assumption. We're going to talk about reading comprehension. We're going to get into the nuts and bolts of the LSAT. And then when we're able to do that and talk about preparation, I know you and I both really enjoy it. That's what we like the most. But because there has been so many changes and developments in the last 2 years, we've ended up talking quite a bit about LSAC and the things that they are doing and changes to the LSAT itself. And here we are again. I'm looking forward to the day, quite honestly, when things are renormalized and talking about the newest decision or problem that's come up is not what we were doing. And we can instead talk about logic games or logical reasoning a little bit more frequently.
Yeah, our back's against the wall here a little bit. We don't really have a choice. We can't ignore these things. They're too important. But yeah, I'm with you, man. Predictability would be a lovely, a lovely thing.
It will be,
it's
but
just
we've
awfully
become
scarce.
reporters,
Yeah.
essentially. We're just reporting on what's happening, but the changes are so significant that they have to be reported. And a lot of times what I've noticed when I see other sources is that they don't necessarily have all the information, or they don't understand the context of this because they're missing some of the history of things that have happened previously. So there's really two big pieces here that we're going to talk about today. One of them, which we're going to start with, which is the newest, freshest breaking news that you can get. And that is that LSAC is going ahead and reinstating testing limits on a year, 3-year, lifetime basis. So let's talk a little bit about that, because the great news here is this is not something that is retroactive. It is something that is forward-looking, and that is precisely the right decision by LSAC in this.
Yeah, if you can agree with testing limits in principle, I think.
I can't, but that's another.
So when we say that's the right decision, given that hypothetical presumption to start with, this is at least the right way to re-implement these. So
before you go on, let me just say you are totally right, and I'm glad you brought that point up. I totally disagree with test limits, and I wish that they didn't exist, but in that context. So thank you for that clarification.
You're welcome. I wish we could end it right there.
Day's over.
Yeah, Dave agreed with me. We're out. Unfortunately, no, there's more. So as a quick bit of history here, some people may not be aware of this. With the digital testing, they put in some new limits back in, was it September of last year? I believe is when this first started. Yeah. Where you could take it 3 times, any 3 times, and this applied to cancellations, kept scores, any of that, within their yearly cycle, which is June 1st through the end of the following May. 3 attempts, and then you're out until the next June. 5 times was your limit in a 5-year period, and then 7 in a lifetime. And then you're done forever. You're also done if you get a 180. I always like to make that point to people.
You're over.
Yeah. 180s cannot retest no matter what, apparently. But the big one that applied to most people through a single cycle was that you could only take 3 of the 7, 8, 9 times a year before you had to wait until the next June, reset the limit.
Okay, so then fast forward to COVID-19.
Yes.
And the implementation of the flex tests. And given the uncertainty, they made what I thought was also a very good decision at that time, which is these flex tests, we don't know how many they're going to be. This was back in May, really April. We're going to have them not count toward the limit. And so at that point, they actually suspended the limitation. And that has been the case for each of the tests that they've announced. So May, June, July, and August, none of these tests count towards the test-taking limits. And you and I had speculated before that if this kept on going, sooner or later they'd reinstate them. And I also responded to a number of students who wrote me scared that they would retroactively count them. I was like, they're not going to do that. It would be unreasonable and unfair to tell you one thing and then to change their mind afterwards. So they fortunately have not changed their mind in that respect. But going forward, after the August test, so the August test will not count, but after August, these tests, flex or not, are going to start counting towards the test-taking limits once again.
That's right. Yeah, so beginning in October, North America International October test, flex or in person, that will count as one of your tests for this particular cycle, and one of your 5 and one of your 7 lifetimes. So October will count, November will count, unless, again, they somehow go back on this policy. But as of literally us recording this today, we just found this out. And here we are to broadcast it.
Yes, straight up fresh information. So keep that in mind. If you're taking this August flex test, that has no impact on you whatsoever. It only will impact you after August, which would be October and later at this point. Yeah. And then I think they're going to go ahead and stick back to these testing limits until we can convince them to get rid of them entirely, which is what they should do.
Yeah, from a practical standpoint, it means that if you take October and November of this year, you've only got one more test that you can take until next summer. So October, November, January, you're done until the following June. So keep that in mind, guys, as you test. Some of these flex tests I know people would take as almost like a preview or just to get one under their belt, see what it's like. You can still do that, but now that comes with a greater degree of consequence. So that's what we want to make sure you keep in mind.
Yeah, and as you said, this means when you sat for the test, even if you cancel your score, that counts as an official sitting for the exam. So that's the latest update there. I don't know how to feel about it. Not
Yes,
great.
you do. Yeah, you do.
I said I don't know, but then it turns out, in fact, that I do know, and it is negative.
It's not great. It's not as bad as it could be, but then that's hardly the bar to set, isn't it?
It truly is not the bar to set.
Yeah.
All right. So let's move on to what I would consider the main event, really, which was talking about a bunch of LSATs that were lost. Although lost isn't really maybe the best word, there was some problem with the data as it was transmitted in some form or another. And so missing tests, perhaps, is a good way to put this.
Yeah, absent blank. To lose something, you have to have it. And I got the impression here that they never had it in the first place.
Yeah, I don't think this was a matter of carelessness. This, I think, will ultimately turn out to have been a technological issue, and sometimes those things occur. So that doesn't necessarily excuse anything here, and it doesn't all of a sudden make it less worrisome, because I think it's hugely problematic that this happened, and I realize they are aware of that as well, and I can see from the efforts that they're making both to communicate and to attempt to recover the data that they know that this is a serious problem. So let us talk about exactly what happened.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to preface it too. This is not going to be a extended bashing episode. This is just, again, trying to report what's occurred and give our take on it. So the July Flex test that occurred, those scores were set to be released last Thursday morning. And what unfortunately unfolded is the day before those scores were set to be released, so last Wednesday, students started getting calls from LSAC directly, which is pretty unusual. The calls reported that we no longer have your test data. You will not be receiving a score tomorrow because we don't have your information. We don't have your answers. And this started cropping up online midday last Wednesday, basically. And of course, panic ensued.
Rightly so.
Rightly so, understandably.
Now, during that period of time, I obviously reached out to my contacts at LSAC and was immediately told, we are working on it. This was not a huge percentage of test takers, so this isn't thousands of people, which was reassuring. And as it ultimately came out over the course of the next 24 hours and has been widely reported now in some legal publications, it was around 1% of the 14,000 test takers who took July. So the initial numbers that I saw actually were 120, 130, and 140 in various publications. As it turned out, it appears that it was about 120 people who had problems with their scores.
Yeah, interestingly enough, the quote that I saw from LSAC was that there were some false positives, which is maybe not the language I would have used. What they meant, of course, is that they thought they had lost some scores that they actually hadn't, that they did in fact have.
I would imagine that when this occurred, that a degree of panic ensued. And sometimes when that happens, your immediate thought is, I lost this or I lost that. And then you sit down and you look at it in a rational, organized way. And then you discover, okay, that wasn't the case. Whew, it is there. But I'm sure at first, when you begin to realize that there is this issue, whoever is in charge or whatever department's in charge is like, what's going on? And it's clearly more on the technology side because this is an entirely digitally administered administration. So that's where the issue's ultimately going to reside. Now, from that point, they have said, and when we take a look at the communication that they actually made about this, they're like, look, we're trying to recover these scores. We're looking at the information to see if it is there. This is an ongoing process. Ultimately, they were able to recover, as I understand it, about 40 of the scores.
Thus far.
Yeah, and so they began to release those. They released 15 of them on Friday, and they are apparently releasing more today. So some people are getting them, and even tomorrow. So they don't want people to have to retake the test, ultimately, which is the only way to fix this. They are trying to get those scores out. So we're going to see probably more people saying, hey, they found my score.
Yeah. Unfortunately, there is no way at this point that we could help to identify who those found score people might be. So I know, Dave, I'm certain right now someone is listening to this who got that call last Wednesday, has not received their score. It's been lost, and they will actually get it today, tomorrow. There's somebody else listening to this whose score was lost and will stay lost.
And they were hoping it was them.
They're like, please let my score show up. And it won't. And there's nothing we can do to pinpoint who's who, unfortunately.
Yeah, we don't know that. Only LSAC knows that. And I'm sure that, my understanding from talking to them is they have been working furiously on this. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But that's really where things are going. At about 120 people, 40 of the scores have been recovered. There's still 80 out there. They're still looking for them. And at least as far as what they decided to do, we'll take a look at this. But the very first thing that I said was they need to offer these students an immediate retake.
Yes.
Not in August, immediately. And they did that. It took them a little bit. And I really wish that when they called students, they'd had that option on the table. They didn't. It took them a day or so to process that and realize that they had to. And my understanding is the reason it took that time was because they couldn't just say, oh, we're doing it. They had to go back to ProctorU and say, when can we do it?
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts. A lot of moving parts to establish a new administration, especially on a week's sort of timeline.
That's exactly right. So they are doing that this upcoming Thursday. So in just a couple of days, if your score was lost, you'll be able to sit down and retake the test, which is, I don't know, it's not going to make me feel all comfortable. It's another LSAT-Flex test that you'll be taking, and then you'll be praying that, your scores aren't lost again, which is, again, really unlikely. But that'll certainly be in the back of more than one person's mind as that's ongoing. So just be aware of that.
Right. But there is a makeup, and they've said that they're going to turn those scores around. And again, you guys can't see me crossing my fingers, but all of them are crossed. They're going to turn those scores around within a week, they've said.
And I will put money right here in the LSAC casino that says that it is less than a week.
Yeah.
You and I have seen them turn LSAT scores around in 3 days, and I would suspect that that's what we're going to be looking at. This is one of those high-profile error situations where you work fast to fix it. So I know they wouldn't promise 3 days because they want to make sure that everything does line up, but I would not be surprised if they get them out faster than predicted, and I would imagine that that is their goal. So that at least is a good thing.
I'm not going to put an over-under on it necessarily, but I would definitely take the under on a week. Will it be that following Tuesday? I don't know.
Yeah.
But they'll be quick, and this is particularly useful, obviously, for people who needed the test results from July for their current applications. We'll talk a little more about that in just a second, too.
Yeah, so let's take a look at what officially LSAC actually said about this. And they sent an email to students who were affected. And it was a pretty quickly produced email to kind of get people an update and information. And if I had any kind of criticism here, it's like, this is a challenging situation. And so you really want to try to have as many pieces in place when you're going to notify people. That's why I made the comment, I wish they had the test date set up and all these kinds of different things. But the message they sent had two basic parts. It's like, look, there's an update here on what's going on. And the first part was, we're still working on it. We're trying to recover your answers. And they talk about using a variety of computer forensics and other methods. My understanding is they brought in some heavy hitters from outside the company, from like big tech companies like Microsoft, to take a look at this and make sure that what they were doing was accurate and correct. Right. So that at least is somewhat reassuring that they brought in experts to do this. And they didn't have all the data, but they were still working on it. So on that basis, they then talked about the free retest. And they gave people the date, the August 6th, and told them it would be a flex, and these were the start times and so forth. And then let people know that if they wanted to go ahead and take it, they just had to email them. So that was their first communication. You also saw reporters out there trying to ask them, hey, what's going on?
Right.
And so there were some official comments being made that kind of explain, it was a technical transfer issue. These kinds of things happen, unfortunately. We're really doing our best to try to recover all the information.
Mm-hmm.
I will point out that during this time, students were calling the phone number of LSAC and asking questions. And I would just take a moment to remind everyone that when there is breaking news and developments like this, the phone people at LSAC often don't have that information instantaneously. And so I had people online who were like, no, I just called them and they said there's not a retest. And I'm like, I am talking to their administration and they are quite adamant that that is the case. And I've actually received an email from them explaining what it is that they're going to do. So I'm not saying don't trust the people who answer the phones. I'm saying give them the benefit of realizing they may not have gotten the update already.
Yeah,
So
information seems to trickle down pretty slowly over there at times. I had a lot of people, I'm sure you did too, say to me, how do you guys know more than their staff does?
Like, that's not really the case.
And I'm like, well, we don't, but we're in direct contact with the higher ups there. And it takes a little while for that information to disseminate internally.
Well, and also, if you're a phone person, this has got to be the worst 2-year period that you've ever been through with them, because everything was the same for years. During the flex test, when there were technical problems, I had students who would say to me, I've gotten screwed, I'm dead. I'm like, well, wait a second. There may be a chance for a retake. This is something that's happened in prior administrations. You may be able to retake it in 4 or 5 days. Well, they would turn around, call the phone people at LSAC, and be told, oh, no, you've seen the test. It's over. Well, yes, that was true in the past, but not with these flex tests. They can create different forms out of it. And so I was like, they're lying to me. I'm like, they're not lying to you. They simply are in the dark on how this actually works. And it's a little complicated. And they're not, I guess you could say they do it professionally, but I mean, they're answering the phone. They're not really doing this professionally. They're not as invested as maybe you or I or even the students who are taking this test are invested.
For sure. Yeah. So that's, I think, some of the early communication, if you could call it that people saw. There were a couple of other things that LSAC offered. One is a refund for July, which is a no-brainer. They also offered 4 free score reports. I think those normally cost, $45 a pop?
Yeah.
And they've made a guarantee of sorts, a promise that this will not happen again. They have discovered what caused the issue, even if they didn't fully explain it, and said that they've remedied it in their system. So it was a software thing.
Yeah, they didn't explain it, and people have asked me to get the explanation. I'm not going to get it. I didn't even ask for it because I'm fully aware of the fact that they will not tell me. They're not going to be like, well, this is what happened. And also, the comment I received was, it's so technical, like, I don't even understand what it says. Like, it was one of those things where you start talking to a technical person and your eyes glaze over because they're like going on about like code language and this command and everything. This is why I say it's less about them losing scores and more about having a tech issue. And to be honest, we know that data transfer is already fraught with problems.
Sure.
You ever send an email to somebody and later on they're like, I never got that email. Sometimes it's intentional on their part, but sometimes it's like, wait, where is it? I don't see it. And you're like, oh, blip in the system.
Yeah. Yeah, they didn't lose your email. They never received it. There's a difference.
Yeah, I have a feeling that what they did as far as fixes was something that changed the system a little bit and then probably more data redundancy. That's a guess on my part. It just makes the most logical sense, though. So,
yeah. These lost score people actually fell, from my estimation, into 2 groups. One with a degree of urgency the other group may not have had. There were about 25 of the people whose scores were lost who had applications outstanding, pending applications out to schools, which means they're trying to start this fall. And this July test was either going to be used to get them off of a wait list or to negotiate or perhaps attain scholarships, which means losing that type of data really cost them their last opportunity to start school this fall or to get their money for this fall. That's brutal. If this is your first ever attempt and you're going to start next year or beyond, it's not great, but at least you've got a cushion. If this was your Hail Mary moment, this was a really, really terrible outcome. But LSAC did actually address that. And for those 25 people, they've said they're going to work with them and their schools directly, take full blame for this, try to convince the schools to be a little bit lenient or flexible on the deadlines. And obviously that's part of the reason they've established this makeup test this Thursday and turned those scores around so you can still get results in time for a fall start.
Yeah, you and I talked to a student jointly via email on the day this was announced as being a problem with one of our students, and she was rightly in a panic.
Yeah.
She's like, I need this to get into a particular law school, and this is going to cost me a year. Because at that point, LSAC had not told her that they were going to retest. And so we were like, let's see what we can do. And that's when we were like, this would be the way to go about this. And I think they were already working on that retest. But she was devastated is a mild description for, I think, how she was feeling at that point. She was just crushed.
I think devastated would have been a huge improvement over how she felt.
Yes, and she wasn't the only one that we ended up talking to, which we'll come back to with a different story in a few minutes. But at least they did announce that retest, which was, this is terrible. You have to go retake the entire test. She felt that she'd done pretty well. It's like, to get the time off to do it, you have to reset up everything. You got to tell everyone to be quiet. You pray that there's not any kind of like issue with either proctoring or now the lost data. It is a highly stress-inducing situation, which is by itself a huge problem.
Yeah,
so
it's
catastrophic.
I saw comments online about like, now I've got to tell my boss I need another day off for this test that I just had to take a day off, that I've also had to take days off to study for. What in the world?
The boss is like, what are you really doing?
Really?
Where are you going on these
grandmothers
on these
can
days?
die. Like, yeah, I get it. How much homework did the dog eat? That's how this feels to me. But it is true. So Thursday, August 6th, from 8 to 5 p.m. Eastern, you can schedule your time and take this test. I don't know that we want to get deep into predictions about it, so let's not play that game, aside from saying it's going to be an LSAT like any other, hopefully with results this time.
Yeah, I think it's hard to predict. They might give you forms of the test that you didn't see the last time. They might go back and use a form of a test that they've already kind of used. I don't know. They could pull out some makeup test that they've used many times and feel really good about.
Sure. To clarify one point you just made, it will not be the same test that they lost the results from.
No, but remember there are 30, 40 different variations on that test.
Yeah.
So they could give you one of the variations you didn't see.
Yes.
My understanding is that the data problem had nothing to do with this test. It was more about just like typical technology that, kind of problems that you see.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because I think the pivot point here is they haven't told us a whole lot, which frees us up to speculate.
Yeah, let's talk about what might have happened.
Yeah.
And kind of try to figure out exactly what is going on or was going on that they supposedly have fixed now. I think we know all the details. The details are covered. The facts of the situation as they've been stated are clear. Let's start off with, I think, a really interesting question. The day before score release is when these students were told, hey, hi guys, you're screwed. Yeah. We're really sorry. We're doing what we can, but you're still screwed. That was basically the message that they got the day before, and I don't think I'm being a jerk by putting it so bluntly.
Yeah, why did it take over 2 weeks for them to let people know that data was gone?
I think the answer to that is pretty simple. They were clearly going as long as they could and working as hard as they could to get scores back. And so they were hoping, apparently, and this is speculation, but I think it's reasonable speculation, that they would discover somehow, oh, there they are. Kind of like a lost file folder. Oh, Bob put it in the coffee room. That Bob.
Right.
Can't believe that guy. So, when you look at something like that, the reason they waited was for that, is to try to get as much as they could. However, that immediately begs the question of, well, why didn't they have a complete plan in place? Because they knew 3 or 4 days prior to that, they still hadn't found it.
Yeah.
Unless someone there was like, we think we're going to get it. and they were confident and highly confident about it.
Yeah.
They should have been better prepared for the announcement.
I also suspect that over the span of that 2+ weeks, they were having some recovery success. We know that even since scores have been released, they've gotten about a third of those announced lost. They've gotten them, and will continue to send them out to people and keep looking for more. I'm guessing it was a lot more than 120 at first, and they probably whittled that down over time and realized by the day before they had essentially run out of time to keep looking without saying something to people.
Exactly. I agree with you on that. So wait until the last minute, because that's fewer people to actually notify, less of a problem to have to report and talk about.
And of course, everyone's hopeful. If you're at LSAC and you're starting to see a random score pop up here and there, you want to push it to the last minute with that, again, just hope and a prayer that you're able to get as many as you can.
Agreed.
Yeah.
However, that means that when you do finally announce it, you have everything sitting in place ready to go as far as remediation of the problem.
Yeah. You should have had the email typed up and ready to send. You should have had a makeup already on the books and planned out. The fact that people still had to wait another 48 hours to hear about that stuff was, it's hard to justify.
So let's talk about, theories as to what happened here. And again, no one said anything to me as like, this is what happened. I know that there was some type of data storage, data transfer problem. Like I said already, everybody who deals with technology has faced something like this. We've all lost something electronically before. And there's a couple different theories that I think we could float out there.
And some I think we can do away with. For instance,
I like that.
Well, here's one of the early theories, let's call it conspiracies, that was popping around online. Was there like some single rogue proctor at ProctorU who had administered all of these lost tests, and it was like a human error? It was operator error, basically. This one proctor wasn't hitting the right buttons or doing the right thing. And that was the unifying theme or feature that all these people had in common, the consistent cause. That does not seem to have been the case.
Some proctor high as a kite hitting the wrong button. Trying to save your score, but hitting the microwave instead. Is that what you're suggesting?
That's right. That's right.
Nope. I would agree with you that theory is out the window based upon our conversations with various people.
Yeah. Ditto while we're doing away some of the others that I think are not just far-fetched, but actually false. This was not an international only or a North American only. It happened to people around the world. This was not a single time or single day event. This happened to people who tested on Sunday. It happened to people who tested on Tuesday. It happened to international people who tested Thursday and Friday. So there was no unifying feature among that, which tells terrible. You that it seems random.
It tells you it wasn't some kind of system collapse that happened Thursday at 1 p.m. It wasn't like all those people, there was some kind of server problem or transmission problem that affected all of those people. In a sense, I'd probably feel more comfortable knowing that that had been the cause, because then I could point to some kind of like widespread outage that affected everybody in equal measure. But as you said, that was not the case, so we can go ahead and dismiss that idea.
Yeah. Or just let's hope they fired that proctor, caused all these problems. No, that wasn't it.
He didn't even know he'd been fired.
Right.
He was still waiting for his Hot Pocket to come out.
That's right. Instead, this appeared to be a slightly more sporadic tech glitch, really. The question is, where did it come from? Where did it originate? Was it, for instance, a ProctorU data storage or upload data transmission failure? Maybe.
Could be.
Could be. People had said to me, well, it can't be that because this is done through LawHub. ProctorU is basically just hovering there as an observer. They're not actually controlling the data. And that's not entirely true, as I understand it.
Well, they talk about, it's a browser extension that you have to install and so forth. But ProctorU is also part of the recording process for this. And so you have information in different places. ProctorU has test information that they use, and that's also being transmitted to LSAC. There is a handshake that is going on, that is occurring here. And so no matter how you're going to slice it, when you have multiple points, players kind of participating in a testing experience like this, there's data transfer that is actually occurring. So whether it was a problem with that handshake, whether there was a problem on the ProctorU side, or whether it was an LSAC storage side issue, those are all reasonable questions. We don't know. They're not going to tell us because they don't want to compromise the black box aspect of their testing program by telling us that.
ProctorU's role in this, though, I did learn a bit more about it. I know you did as well, because the question naturally came up, wait, if ProctorU filmed this whole thing, couldn't they just go watch the replay? Couldn't LSAC go watch the tape? And the answer to that is no, as we found out. Number one, we were told, I think, that the ProctorU film is not terribly high quality. It certainly doesn't necessarily reveal everything that has occurred.
Yeah, think about what the ProctorU film is for. It's so that the proctor can kind of like get a look at your testing room, make sure that there's nothing causing a violation, and then to basically check in on you and make sure you're not talking to somebody else.
That you stayed on camera,
Yeah, it is, as I understand it, not a complete record of your test taking, which means that there can be pieces that are missing in there, which they don't consider to be a compromise because, look, if they don't have, if it's skipping through your session and they don't have 20 seconds of it, who cares? Because what did you do? Call someone in that exact 20 seconds to be like, what's the answer to 17? Yeah. No, you didn't. So this is one of the reasons I've said repeatedly that cheating on this test is a very low-level issue, in my opinion. But
even knowing that the recording is intermittent, you don't know when you're being recorded and when maybe no one's looking at you.
Yeah. So the proctors are proctoring not just you, but dozens of people. So they're jumping in and out. They're not watching every second. They can go back and check on you later on and they can figure out if something was happening. And there's an AI that's listening that says, I'm hearing loud noises for student number 1742. Check it out or look at this later on. I flagged it. It is a system that has a lot of different pieces to it. But remember that what you are doing is you are typing and clicking. That is the information that is really critical here. And the video won't show that perfectly. Yeah, they can sync it up to what they have from like all the keyboard strokes that you were making. But being able to see you doesn't say, did that person choose B or C? And whether you chose B and then changed your mind and chose C. It's not a perfect matchup. But also, let's be honest, it wasn't designed to be a perfect matchup either.
Yeah, that's not the purpose of ProctorU. It's not, a validation effort. It's more just a security measure. Not for this type of security. So that's one possibility. Something in the ProctorU system failed to transmit the data correctly.
It could also be that, there was a problem during that transmission. Some type of corruption, some type of signal problem. Or maybe the data arrived and something tripped in the LSAC system and it didn't slot in properly or into the wrong place. And now they're looking at it on a different file for it. It could also be that once LSAC had it, there was some type of tech issue with that. I mean, I've had hard drives fail on personal computers before. Everybody talks about the cloud and everything like that. And yes, I know that that's, where data is stored, but that doesn't mean that everything is perfect. The existence of a cloud doesn't automatically mean there's never a problem. So it could be somewhere in there as well.
Yeah, if I want to take that a little bit further into conspiratorial theories, it's possible that explains the 2-week delay. They called people on Wednesday the day before. Maybe something crashed in their system on Tuesday, and that's when this data actually was, and this would be the right word, lost. Maybe they had it and something happened right before the score release where some of it got corrupted, something got deleted. Somebody at LSAC was microwaving that Hot Pocket, hit the wrong button, whatever.
My sense of this is that the data was not lost, that this was related to some kind of tech redundancy issue. And the fact that they've said, we've put steps in place to stop this from happening again suggests to me that it was some type of transfer issue. Something didn't happen right, or some series of steps occurred that hadn't occurred previously, and all of a sudden there was this issue that, according to them, popped up out of nowhere. So that's kind of the way I'm feeling about it.
That's my take,
In
too.
the long run, does it make a difference? No, because we're not going to know the answer. I want to know the answer. I want to hear what they have to say about it, and I would love to hear more about the specific steps that they have supposedly taken to stop this from apparently never happening again. I just don't think I'm going to hear that. I've said many times that the new LSAC is way more transparent than the old LSAC, which was not transparent at all. So I'm not saying that this was, that's a massive change. It is much better, though. So it is a pretty significant step in the right direction, but that doesn't mean they're going to reveal all their secrets and everything that's going on. So I doubt we'll get more information on this. I'd love to see it, but I just don't expect it.
Yeah, same here. So when I, again, explore the fringe theories, I don't actually think that's what happened. I don't think they had the data on Tuesday and lost it on Wednesday and started making phone calls.
No, you're just stirring the pot.
Yeah, well, it's kind of what I do.
Well, the truth is that we're never going to know, but they have said that they have it fixed now. So we're supposed to feel better about that overall. And that's really what we can do. But let's talk a little bit about the test recovery idea and, how that makes us feel and just the whole situation, because you and I have run into a series of students now who have heard about the test data loss or, the missing scores and contacted us. And we've talked to other students who actually had their information lost. And some of the stories are disconcerting. Some of them are less so. For example, I had a student earlier today send me a message saying, do you think my scores might have been lost? I got the exact same score that I got last time, yet I felt much better about this. Do you think they just lost my score and then gave me the same score? And this is an actual question. Mm-hmm. And my response was to, at first think, no, I don't think that's the case. And then as I explained it to this student, I was like, to have done that would suggest a massive conspiracy. And, I like a good conspiracy theory as much as the next person. I just don't think that applies here in large part because there was a much easier explanation they could have given you. Hey, we just lost it.
Yeah.
To make up a score and then put it in there, whoa, that's not. I would be like, guys, we just don't have the scores and walk away from it there.
Sure. Yeah. And to only recover a third of them. If they're going to make up scores and just send them out as part of the recovery, we found them all. Here you go.
Yeah. I mean, then just give everybody a 180.
Sure. I love
it. They've gone from the maddest students to the happiest students ever.
That's right. I was talking to someone online who was actually posting on behalf of her husband, who had tech issues in June, couldn't take the test, got pushed to July, got his score lost, and they found it and recovered it, and he got a 174. But he was looking at his third attempt as part of this makeup this week until they found his score, I believe on Friday or Saturday. So he's thrilled. He's got a 174 that he thought was in the ether somewhere, and now he's But obviously It wasn't happy news for all the recovery.
No, people. And you and I talked to a different student, also from Reddit. I think you were emailing with him before the actual information came out, and then I talked to him by telephone on Saturday morning because his story was really interesting. And as of the recording of this, we don't yet have the answer as to what had happened. But he had started off, I think, in the mid-150s with his initial practice tests, was then scoring in the mid-160s, and I think it even hit the 170s as well, hadn't seen a practice test lower than 164, 165 in ages.
Ever.
They recovered his, ever. So I wasn't wrong. Anyway, they recovered his lost score. And the score was 135. And of course, his response to that is absolutely not. I've never been, there's no way that would actually be the case. And this was the story that as I spoke to him and I kind of listened to what he had to say, and I was trying to really kind of help him out to set up how to deal with LSAC and be reasonable with them to get as much as he possibly could. It didn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
It really felt like, hey, we recovered the wrong score. And that scares me to say, because that calls into question the entire process here. And you and I have talked about this extensively as one of the first things that we talked about, where in a sense, it's like recovering scores opens up questions about the validity of the entire process that I don't like to have to ask and to have to think about.
Yeah. Now we can both stir the pot.
Yeah.
It's true. And it only takes one, in a sense, if one score comes back incorrect. And I mean, for him, I honestly don't know how you explain it otherwise, but that a mistake was made on the scoring end. Maybe they recovered, but only one section transmitted as opposed to all three, because that's about the difference in a 135 versus his 170 plus scores that he was getting on the last several tests. Immediately the entire system, in my opinion, becomes suspect.
It would become suspect. And I think there's two interesting points here, one which I'll make, and then I'll let you follow up with it. The thing that I said to you instantly was that there's an LSAC question from the 1980s that applies to this perfectly. And it talks about the 13th stroke of a clock. Well, clocks are only supposed to strike 12 times. So if it does strike 13 times, it immediately calls into question the validity of the preceding 12. And that's what you and I were talking about. It's like, if there is any score out there that is problematic, then every other score becomes problematic because you'd have to suspect that it's uncertain. And we were kind of like talking about that. And I thought you made a really good response to that about LSAC knowing that to be the case and how that would probably inform their thinking as they return scores.
Right. Yeah. Well, one of the comments I made about that is there's two possible moments of causality behind the 13th stroke of the clock. Either somebody misheard, and again, we both know just how suspect like eyewitness testimony is, for example. These are not always reliable things. So somebody comes out and they're like, I got 4 points lower. Do you think LSAC made a mistake? I think it's much more likely that you just did 4 points worse. But it's also possible the clock is broken. LSAC, though, has to know that if they ever were to return something as official and then have to go back and admit that they had somehow made a mistake, they're essentially jeopardizing their own reliability, their own validity. I think they would be much more likely to just have never said anything than to think like, we can maybe get away with this, or we may have made a mistake. I don't think they would risk it.
Yeah, I think they'd have to have checked this so thoroughly that they had to have some very, very, very high degree of confidence that what they were reporting was accurate, because the alternative immediately suggests don't report anything then, just say you don't have the score. If you're not 100% confident, don't report it. And again, I don't know what will happen with this individual student as of this recording. I don't know what the final conversation with LSAC has turned into and what they're going to allow or grant. I do think, though, that the students who had their scores lost should have the right to see that score and cancel it, because it's just a confidence building. If the person gets out there and they're like, there's no way I got a 135. All right, this sucks. I will cancel it. And that was one of the questions I asked him. I said, if they give you that option, will you be happy? And his response made me laugh, because I was like, I was localizing it to this scenario. And he's like, no, I'll be really unhappy because the whole thing sucks. And I was like, okay, yes, I 100% agree with you about that. But we are asking them for something that really they didn't have to offer. And I do hope that they offer that in this particular case. And I don't think anyone else would feel that's unfair. These students had their scores lost. They were told that they were gone. Now it's been recovered. It's something that is tremendously lower than anything this person has seen. And consequently, as a fellow test taker, I wouldn't think, oh, they got some kind of unfair deal. I would think, man, they got screwed, and this is just a small salve to the wound.
And I'm still at a loss to explain how someone could have realistically actually dropped 30 plus points.
I've seen drops of, 10, 12 points, and so often that comes down to test anxiety, where someone walks out and thinks, I did really well, and it turns out they didn't, and it was legitimate, especially when we looked at their responses afterwards on disclosed tests. 30 points? Yeah, that's quite a bit.
That's incredible. Too incredible, frankly, which again circles back to the idea that something happened internally to this, where the data was somehow corrupted, somehow swapped. I don't know. It's hard to trust a system that makes a single mistake.
It is. I know LSAC said they checked his data 3 times, and they were confident that it was correct, but I'm sure they were confident that the score was going to be transmitted correctly in the first place.
Right.
So hopefully there is at least a safeguard here where he's able to get rid of that score, because I don't think it's fair to have that on your record given this situation. and you can move forward. And I know it sucks terribly, but take a retest and then hopefully produce a score that is actually more indicative of where he had been scoring.
Yeah. For anyone listening to this whose score might have been lower and is thinking that you, too, are the victim of some sort of internal malfunction, I think that is not the case, frankly. Statistically speaking, based on what I know they're trying to accomplish here, I can't get behind the idea that multiple scores were somehow corrupted and still released as official.
Yeah. I will say this, and I've said this to several people, and I have not had time to get into the data that they have been releasing on recent tests to the extent that I would like to, primarily because so many problems like this keep coming up, where it's like, okay, that just destroyed, a couple days worth of time while we try to fix someone else's problem. And I mean LSAC's problems,
no, this is
not student problems.
Right.
But one of the things that really is anecdotally the case to me, and whether or not that's supported by the hard data, I can't tell because I don't have it all. And I only have part of it. But I sure seem to feel like there's a greater degree of score variability here. I'm not saying that the scores have turned out in any way, shape, or form different than the usual percentiles, but there are always a couple of students, and it seems like a lot with these flex tests, who write me afterwards who are like, I just crushed it. Best performance ever. Highest previous score was, 165. I got a 171. I had more people write that to me with scores in the 170s after this last test than maybe ever before.
Mm-hmm.
However, I will point out that's wholly anecdotal.
Yeah.
And certainly, my public profile is higher than it was, say, 3 years ago. So perhaps it's not surprising that they would do that. I also had students who were like, man, I dropped 5 points out of the blue. And sometimes I can look at that and be like, hey, this might have been test anxiety. I heard some stories where I was like, I'm hearing a lot of anxiety elements here that could have caused this. But I do see a greater degree of variability, and that cuts both ways. If you're going to have more higher scores, you're going to have more lower scores compared to somebody's practice test. I'm not, again, talking about overall numbers, so I hope that nuance comes through here. But that variability could be something where your immediate thought is, I didn't score 3 points lower. They screwed up.
Right.
We don't know. And the likely answer is you did score 3 points lower because the alternative is a massive conspiracy that just seems incredibly unlikely when they could have just said, we don't have the scores.
Yeah, LSAC has a lot more to lose than scores, frankly. If it were to ever come out, they had somehow fudged these numbers, then, the entire institution collapses.
Yeah, and so I'll be clear, just reiterating, we don't think they did that. We think that they did everything they could to get the information. The information told them the scores. This is the scores that they've reported, and that's the way it stands.
Again, I know that's little comfort to someone who actually is sitting there with a lower number and wondering, but before anyone resorts to mob violence or something here, know that this is a very reliable process, despite the fact that this has been a dodgy outcome.
That's a good way of putting it, a very British way of putting it.
Yes.
Let's talk about at least, what happens going forward. We know that LSAC has said they put in these new safeguards. 3 additional checks was what I heard that were supposed to help stop this from happening again. I thought you had a pretty cool idea, though, of something that they could do that if they haven't been doing it yet, they could be doing in the future.
Yeah, everybody wants the ability to essentially check on things themselves. We could do this in the old Scantron days. You could request hand scoring, for instance, and they could go check your bubbles. Let's say you missed a line or you double bubbled something. They could actually go back and see, and they adjusted scores, I don't want to say all the time, but with some regularity if they could see that a gridding error was made on the part of the student. You don't really have that anymore, and especially with these flex tests where the exams are non-disclosed and the ProctorU data is not good enough for you to go actually watch the tape. You're really running on a lot of trust here. And let's be honest, Dave, there has been some trust lost. So, one proposal that I have come up with, and I'll say this quite plainly, I hope LSAC hears this and really takes it under consideration, is there is a way that they could adjust the software. It's a pretty easy adjustment. So that instead of when you answer a question, it blackens the bubble in the navigation bar at the bottom for that question number. It actually shows what answer you chose for that question. The answer B, it puts a B down there by the questioner in the bubble itself. And at the end of each scored section, when the time runs out, the system automatically takes a screenshot. that would show the navigation bar and all of your answers. And then they could have that data to quickly reference or to even show you. Be like, no, you actually did miss 11 questions in this first section. Here are your answers. We can compare. That would give them a hard copy of this. And like I said, it's a perfect little software update. It's just like hand scoring of a Scantron because it was a physical copy. I see no reason they couldn't do something like that quickly. And I mean, again, I think it would take a lot of the pressure of doubt off.
Well, it would provide irrefutable record of what someone had actually selected throughout the section, as if it snapshotted it as it closed. And it's interesting because when we created our digital testing system, we actually, our developer, he actually put it so that you could show it that way. Because he was used to looking at Scantrons and thinking that's how you wanted it. And we had to tell him to turn it off.
Yeah.
Which I hated because I love being able to look down and be like, oh, yeah, you chose E there and C, because I could look back over the entire section and see all the choices that had been made. So we know it's possible. It's actually really easy from a technological standpoint. Our system doesn't do it, but that's by intent because we wanted it to mirror, the real testing experience.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, funny enough, by default, our system did. And we turned a feature off. Right. So I know it can be done, and it's not all that hard. And that would, again, it'd be irrefutable at that point. We'd never have this conversation again. Plus, you'd never have to worry about a lost score because you could at least then go back and manually input the student's answers. You'd have them.
Yeah. And you could also, if ever really called upon it in a court of law, so to speak, you could be like, these are the answers and here's the snapshots of them. No data interpretation, no long file. Be like, this is exactly what the screen looked like at the end of each section, and you can see where the student failed to do this, that, or the other thing.
Yeah. And if I'm a test taker, I like that anyway, not just for the sense of comfort it gives me that I know they're not going to mess this up, but it's better for things like guessing. If you can see you've only picked 2 E's in the question and you're at the last 3, you know what to guess, and vice versa.
Exactly.
So there's a student benefit too, and just the strategy.
Yeah, and as far as students, there's not a whole lot you can do here. They're not going to talk further about this. They're not going to give us any further details. They've said that they've taken the steps to correct this. We don't have any choice here. We have to trust that that is the case. And so it may be that these lost tests are a disaster and a true catastrophe for those who were directly affected. But as the title of this podcast says, say it ain't so, LSAC, but it is.
Yeah, it was. I'm going to try to keep all of this in the past tense. That's my optimistic nature. The last episode we talked glass is half full. That's how I'm trying to look at this as well.
Here's a question for you, Jon. The title of this podcast, that Say It Ain't So, do you know what that refers to?
Yes, and I'm blanking on it. Just tell me so I don't sit here and waste anybody's time.
It's an interesting one, especially because baseball right now is starting up again. I wonder how long that's going to last. I'm a Minnesota Twins fan, and they've had a great start, so I paid a little bit more attention than I might normally. But in 1919, there was not just a pandemic, there was a scandal with the World Series being fixed.
The White Sox, right?
Yeah, except they call it the Black Sox scandal. Oh. And they had a great player, Shoeless Joe Jackson. And there's a comment, some kids, Shoeless Joe's at the courthouse after it's all said and done. They've been, found guilty of fixing the game, whatever it is. I don't know the exact scenario because obviously I wasn't there. And the little kid says to Shoeless Joe, he's like, say it ain't so, Joe. That's exactly how I feel talking to LSAC here. Say it ain't so, guys. So a little historical.
Yeah.
1919 coming up a lot these days.
Yeah, right. Well, there you go. There's a historical reference running out there. I don't think we'll have to say it is so. Again, I would hope that there's been a lesson learned here, and I also hope that they make some further proactive adjustments, one of which I just suggested.
Yeah, and more data redundancy, because everybody has a very high trust in technology, but technology isn't inherently 100% perfect. So anything they can do to make it as close to perfect, or at least to have as much redundancy as possible, would be really nice here. However, I have a very strong feeling that they're already aware of that point. So on that note, I have nothing more to say about it. You?
No. No, I think we've said as much as we can here. I also know that anyone listening to this probably feels about as dissatisfied as I do, which is not great. We tend to provide a lot of comfort, a lot of optimism and hope in these things. The best we can say here is trust the system, and we expect them to get it right from now on.
I will say this, if they don't, then we're going to take them to the fire. We certainly give them a bit of a hard time here. But this is integrity level stuff where you don't mess with it at that level. If there is a problem like this, I don't want to see data recovery again. I want to see that either we have the scores, and actually that's just all I want to see.
Yeah.
We have the scores and they are all accurate. But if this comes up again, they're calling into question the entire system, and that is a huge problem for me. And so they will have to rightly be called out for that. I'm sure they're aware of that. Everything that I've heard from them as they have talked about this has been, oh my God, we realize what a big deal this is. We're going to do everything possible. So I think they know the enormity of the problem and really the future consequences if this were to happen again. So let's hope that they've taken all the appropriate steps and more to make sure it never happens again.
Agreed.
All right. On that note, if you get a chance, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or anywhere else you may find it in the world. And if you've enjoyed it, give us a comment or a rating. And if you have any questions, please send those to lsatpodcast@powerscore.com. On that note, hopefully this is the end of problems, at least in the LSAT world. We can get back to talking about the actual test. I pray that to be the case. I know, Jon, you do as well.
Yes.
I usually pray with a drink in my hand, and today it's coffee. So, thanks so much for listening. Everybody stay safe out there. We'll talk to you soon.